Okay, so this is my cultural heritage final project. I did make it into a presentation just because we had written so many essays during the semester that I just wanted to try something different and be a little bit more creative. So I thought doing a presentation would be good and show off my creative side, and I think it went well. So this is my cultural heritage. My biological parents are from Durango, Mexico, which is like the center part of Mexico. It's a rural area, so there are many animals like sheep and pigs, horses, cows. They are from a small ranch called San Ignacio de Loyola, which in this part of Mexico, um, every like in every city there's small little ranches, so it's like divided into different lands, and in this particular part of Durango, we we raise like cattle, like sheep, pigs, and mainly people do live off of their own um, livestock. So my dad recalls having to kill his own chickens for dinner sometime and like skin them, or like kill a pork once every year for a celebration, stuff like that. Um, and when I say biological parents, I mean like my mom and dad. But I wasn't raised by my mom, so I was raised by my stepmom and my dad ever since I was 3 years old. So from now on, I will refer to my stepmom as my mom. So she was born in Tijuana, Baja California. Baja California translates to the lower part of California, which it's the border town. It's like the very, very border town from California into Mexico. It's very populated. There's many tourists, and also fun fact, they do accept U.S. dollars, and actually, it is preferred if you pay in U.S. dollars. In my dad's rural part, like rural town or rural state, they do not accept American dollars. Like for whatever reason, you have to switch it to Mexican pesos. And this basically shows the differences between my parents. My mom was raised in the city, and my dad was raised in the farm, like farm area. So they have very different childhoods, and like I did interview them, and the things that they had to say was like so different. Like my dad, he was very poor growing up, which is also like the poverty versus wealth. He was very poor growing up, couldn't even afford more than one pair of shoes every year. And he always wanted to come to the United States of America because he heard it was so great and it was the land of the free, and he wanted to be here and like make money. And my mom, since she was raised where there were a lot of tourists, she was already exposed to Americans. So she didn't think that the US was a big thing, and she didn't actually ever plan on coming here. She did never cared actually. Okay, so in this slide I am showing the state of Durango, which is in the center of Mexico. Another fun fact about it, um, Durango is located by Culiacan, Sinaloa, which is this area over here. And basically, this area is very famous for like trafficking, drug trafficking. So this part of the of Mexico is where like the infamous El Chapo is from, and a lot of songs come out of this area. Um, it obviously, like, this area is full of drug trafficking, so it trickles into our home state, which causes a lot of poverty. And yeah. And then this is what it actually looks like. That's what the land looks like. Like, it's just green. Like, it's not really a city. It's a city, but it's very green and very rural. And then this is what the stores look like. They're little shacks. They're small little stores. These are grocery stores, by the way, and they're very small, and sometimes they're very like old and shabby, but this one is a like much nicer version. And then this is the state, or this is Tijuana here, where my mom is from, and it's, as you can see, it's the little border from the United States into Mexico. This is what it actually looks like. It's extremely populated. There's houses on hills, and a lot of the houses are shabby, but it's not too bad. It's just because there's a lot of people. And then the grocery stores look like this in this part of Mexico. So they have, since there's more tourists, there's more money coming in, and they have more money to spend on structures like buildings and stuff like that. And in the other state, there's not that much money. It's just poverty everywhere. So these are the 5 things I will be talking about. These were pretty dominant in my culture. Acculturation, internalized oppression, overgeneralization, individual classism, ethnocentrism. Okay, so internalized oppression. So basically, subordinate status is normal and inevitable. So when people are oppressed in an ongoing manner for a long time, they come to believe the stereotypes and the myths about their own group that are communicated by the dominant group. So in this example, like people who are like the majority, so the whites, and then minority culture, so like Mexicans, blacks, Asians, like minority. They accept and inculcate the negative image of themselves and absorb their subordinate status as being deserved, normal, and inevitable. When the oppressed begin to believe that the inferiority imposed on them is a natural way of life, they have internalized that oppression. So I see this a lot, especially in like people who are the firstborn here in the United States. The example I put was my parents' accent and limited English. So when we would have a lot of school meetings back in elementary, I used to be embarrassed that my parents had an accent, and I thought it was just meant that if they had an accent, if they couldn't speak right and perfect, then that meant like we're poor and we're always going to be poor. And I don't know why or where I got this idea from. I think I was just exposed to it a lot on like television and stuff like that. But I was really, really embarrassed. And I was embarrassed that they didn't know English. And yeah, now I'm not embarrassed because I know that it's difficult to learn another language, especially when you come to a new country. And also, like, for my parents, I don't think they had internalized oppression. My parents think it's pretty normal, and I did have internalized oppression because I was embarrassed because none of my friends had like Mexican parents, like parents from Mexico. All of my friends had parents who were born here, but they were Mexican, or white parents. So it was just really embarrassing. I thought we were like lower class. The second one is overgeneralization. It is when you come to a conclusion and you don't consider all the facts. So, overgeneralization is an error that involves coming to a conclusion based on information that is too general and not specific enough. So what I put for my example was Donald Trump. In one of his speeches, he did say, when Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, and I think it says crime. They're rapists, and I know some of them are good people. And this caused a lot of controversy with people who are not from this country, but he's attacking Mexicans, so people who come from Mexico here. And he is overgeneralizing the people from Mexico. Like, he's saying that we're all rapists, that we're all bringing drugs, and that we all do crime. And some of us may be good people, but most of us are rapists, bringing drugs and crime. And I just think that this is very, like, a very toxic thing, and especially in Mexico. In Mexico, we talk about it a lot, and we joke about it a lot. Like, oh, people from America or United States have like the worst president, and we joke about it a lot. But it's something serious, and I think a lot of Mexican people got their feelings hurt, especially with my family. My parents came to to United States for a better life for myself and like my siblings. And maybe back then they didn't know they were going to have kids, but my parents came for a better life. They came for freedom, and our state or our country, Mexico, is very poor, and our government is very bad. So they came here looking for freedom, and when people overgeneralize, how does he know that we don't have papers? How does he know that we're bringing drugs? How does he know that we're rapists? Because we're not. All types of people, any kind of race can be a rapist, or any person from a different race can bring crime or drugs, not just Mexicans. And he's basically saying just Mexicans, or mainly Mexicans, do this. My third one is individual classism, which is prejudice against or in favor of people belonging to a particular social class. Classism, this term refers to classism on a personal or individual level, either in behavior or attitudes, either conscious and intentional or unconscious and unintentional. So for my example, I used dating. I interviewed my parents, and I asked them, like, what were the requirements by your parents? Who were you allowed to date and who were you not allowed to date? So something that I got from them was, you're not allowed to date anyone darker than you, and especially if you're a man. So my dad's not that dark, but he did mention that he wasn't allowed to date anyone who was darker than him. Even if they were Mexican, so it didn't have to be black. If they were Mexican and they were darker than him, he was not allowed to date. And just because darker people in Mexico are considered dirty and poor, and that's like prejudice. My mom also said they told her to marry a white man. He has money. So they're generalizing that white people have money and they're wealthy, and that's not okay, but they prefer white people over Mexicans. So date white people and not Mexicans, and black is out of the picture because you're not allowed to date anyone darker than you. And for example, I know, even though my parents have never like explicitly told me, I know that if I bring like a black man home, I will be in all sorts of trouble. And even though I've not told this explicitly, like, I know that my parents will think it's wrong. Even if I personally don't think it's wrong, I think I should be able to date whoever I want, regardless of their race or their skin color. But my parents, they always put in their opinions like that. and that's what they were taught. Ethnocentrism, so preference for characteristics of one's own culture. This makes it discomforting to live or work someplace you are considered a minority. So basically, ethnocentrism. Um, okay, so in elementary school, it was a little bit tough to be able to feel comfortable just because I did go to school with people who had parents that were born here. So this was a big thing, or like or had white parents. And my parents are from Mexico. My parents could not help me do homework. My parents could not even help me like do reading, nothing. My parents could not even read school notes. And I had friends who had parents who could do those things. That's also a reason why I was embarrassed, because I thought my parents might be dumb, like low class, just because they couldn't read those things. So it was really discomforting, and when there's a group of white people in the room, even today, like if it's just full on white people and I'm the only like Mexican American person in the room, like the only Latina, or if there's another Latina, like it still doesn't matter. I'm still uncomfortable because the majority are white people, and that's exactly how I feel now in school. And another good example is I used to have a Disney annual pass, and during the summers I would go with my sister, and there were so many white people, like white skin, blonde hair, blue eyes, like these beautiful like blonde girls. And even though like we have the same thing, they also have annual passes. I also have an annual pass to Disneyland. Um, they would spend like money on food there and stuff like that, which I could not even afford the food there. So, like what I did, I would bring food from home, and then but I would just feel so uncomfortable eating in front of these people because they had money and they could spend on food at Disneyland, and Disneyland food is so expensive. It's like $5 for one water, like Dasani water bottle. And I could not afford that, so I wouldn't buy it, and I would bring food from home, and I would feel really uncomfortable. Even though people never told me anything, no one ever told me straight out like, "Oh, you can't do that," or "That's wrong," or "poor." Like nobody made fun of me. I just did not feel comfortable bringing out like the sandwich bag, or like a water bottle, like from home. I was really, really embarrassed. Acculturation is when a person or group from one culture adopts the values and practices of another. So, a great example of this is my parents never celebrated President's Day, Memorial Day, Independence Day back home in their country. But here, they celebrate it, and we do celebrate this because most of our neighbors are white. So when it's President's Day or like Independence Day, we do like fireworks, that type of stuff. Or President's Day, Memorial Day, we take it off. And we never did, or my parents never did that back home. So they grew accustomed to this culture, and they adopted the values of this culture, but they didn't forget their own culture. So we also began to celebrate Mother and Father's Day with the American calendar, which the American calendar, US Mother's Day is the second Sunday in May, and the US Father's Day is the second Sunday in June. In Mexico, the Mother's Day is May 10th, and Father's Day is June 16th, and that's every year. It never changes in Mexico. But here, we just celebrate it with with Americans, and we celebrate it on the American calendar. But acculturation doesn't mean we forget our own culture, we still incorporate our culture. So we still celebrate Cinco de Mayo, which is the anniversary of the Battle of Puebla. And we also celebrate September 16th, which is Independence Day in Mexico. And we also celebrate the Day of Our Lady of Guadalupe and on December 12th. So, acculturation is a process through which a person or group from one culture comes to adopt the practices and values of another culture while still retaining their own distinct culture. So, even though we practice American culture, like American holidays, we still keep our own holidays from back home. So, we celebrate these things. Even like what is it called, like the Day of the Dead, November 1st, November 2nd, we celebrate this here in the United States, just like we did back home. So that's another thing. And this is my reflection. I am grateful to be able to live in this country. If it weren't for my parents crossing the border illegally, I would not be able to attend school here. I would not have half of the things I have. At the moment, I am upset with the government for making choices for women and their bodies. As a woman, this makes me upset. But I do recognize that I have more options here as a woman than in my parents' home country. I am proud to be Mexican American and I will never try to hide it. Even though I've done so in the past, I've learned from now on that this is not something to be ashamed of. This is something to be proud of. And especially during these times, we have such like a Republican dominated like Congress, and where we have such a terrible president. But especially during these times is when I should be more proud of of my home country and of my parents and my traditions and my heritage. And these are my works cited. These are my parents. I took many of the things that they said and put it into my presentation, and these are just some YouTube videos. Um, this one is average American versus average Mexican people comparison, and then let's see, average American versus average Mexican people comparison. So I watched this video. It's very good. Yeah. And this is my second video, which is Maya and Miguel representing Mexican culture. So this is where I learned a lot of my culture from growing up. I was really, really happy that they had this type of show, and especially now that I'm an adult, many of the shows are just white families, white kids, but this is a Mexican family, and a lot of the things that they show on this show are things that we actually go through in our daily lives. For example, like my parents not speaking, like having a thick accent and that type of stuff. So Maya and Miguel is definitely a good show. Another thing I'd like to say is the new movie Coco by Pixar, or like by Disney, is a really good movie. I like it, and it represents our culture accurately. I love like the Day of the Dead. Like we celebrate those things, and it's so nice to see people like showing this and showing off our culture. But yeah. And some articles I used. And then, yeah, that's it. So I hope you liked my presentation, and that's my cultural heritage.